Wow, look at this setup. Very high tech.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. It took a week for last week's meeting to show up on YouTube. Said, well, I'm going to keep,
I don't want to
keep a recording. Don't worry about it. Mostly interested in the sound.
Oh, we did it first?
Right.
Okay. Which side is my cousin?
Have you tried standing on your head?
Maybe it's something like
She wouldn't.
Oh, yeah, I see.
All right, we're ready to go. We're good to go. We're calling to order public meeting number 236 of the Massachusetts Gaming Commission on February 22nd at our offices in Boston. First item on the agenda, as usual, is the minutes. Commissioner McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that we approve the minutes of our meeting on January 31st, 2018, as they appear in the packet, subject to correction for typographical errors and other non-material matters.
Good second.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Guys have it unanimously.
And I further move that we approve the minutes of the meeting on February 7th of 2018, also subject to correction for typographical errors and other non-material matters.
Second.
Second. Just a note on the top of page 2, where we reference our CFAO and Agnes. We've talked about this a couple of times, making sure that we try to be consistent, professional, and keep a person's job title kind of in front of their name as we consistently do other pieces of in other parts of other meetings.
So we'd want that for
Where-
both of those individuals.
Yeah.
We'll make that correction.
Anything else?
So,
That's as amended, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it, unanimously. Next up is the Investigations and Enforcement Bureau, represented today by Loretto Vilios, the Deputy Director of the IEB and Enforcement Council, Chief Enforcement Council.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and Commissioners.
Good afternoon.
The first item we have is the suitability of an MGM qualifier for your consideration this afternoon, and that individual is Mr. Scott Howard. He's the Senior Vice President and Security Information Officer for MGM Resorts International. You've already seen the investigative report, and I'll give a brief summary now. Mr. Howard joined MGM in 2015. It's his first position in the gaming industry. The IEB designated him as a qualifier in May of 2017. In the period between his joining the company in 2015 and his designation as a qualifier in 2017, MGM was in the process of putting its shared services model into place. During this period, Mr. Saeed Esfahani, MGM's Chief Information Officer, who was qualified in June of 2014, oversaw the IT security function. Later, the positions were split, and Mr. Howard now reports to the Chief Operating Officer, Corey Sanders, who is also a qualifier. Mr. Howard submitted all of the required forms and requests for additional and updated information. He was interviewed by video conference by the investigators, Sergeant Michael Banks from the State Police and financial investigator Susan LaRosa. He cooperated and was forthcoming in all respects. As with the other suitability investigations the IEB conducts, we verified his identity, confirmed his financial stability and integrity, reviewed litigation history, and searched for criminal records. Mr. Howard's responsible at the executive level for personnel and operations of the information services, the information security, security information, security policy, and awareness departments. He supervises teams that monitor security tools, conduct analysis of security information threats, and conduct cybersecurity investigations. He also supervises a team which oversees the architecture of new gaming and solutions to ensure that they are secure. He is a graduate from the University of Texas with a degree in physics. He worked for several small companies as a systems engineer and then as a chief information officer at Benefit Mall in Dallas, Texas before joining MGM. In addition to Massachusetts, he submitted gaming applications in Maryland, New Jersey, and Nevada. The Nevada Gaming Control Board and the Maryland Lottery and Gaming Control Commission reported that his licenses are active and in good standing with no derogatory information. He is still pending by the New Jersey Casino Control Commission. Mr. Howard's active in 2 professional associations. He's a member of the board of directors of the Retail Cyber Intelligence Sharing Center, a group for cybersecurity professionals to share knowledge in the cybersecurity field. He does not receive compensation for that role. He's also a commissioner on the Nevada Commission on Homeland Security Cybersecurity Committee, where he also serves as a volunteer. And this committee, which is made up of both public and private sector stakeholders, as well as the college and university community, makes recommendations to the Nevada Homeland Security Commission on cybersecurity issues. Mr. Howard has demonstrated to the IEB by clear and convincing evidence that he's suitable, and the IEB recommends that the commission vote to find him suitable as a qualifier for MGM.
Comments?
Well, I think it's first of all, it's a very clean report, and so I agree with the recommendation. But secondly, it's really an important position, and I found it interesting that they do a public-private partnership in Nevada, frankly. It's not something that I'm well aware of, those two groups sharing information to have the best possible outcome for the state. So that's just a aside when I read that. But I again, very clean investigation, no issues whatsoever, and I would move that we approve Mr. Howard, the Senior Vice President of Security Information Officer for MGM.
Second.
Any other discussion? Comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously.
Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is listed as a Wynn update, and I'd like to give an update on the status of the investigation into Wynn's ongoing suitability, and that status is that the IEB's investigation is underway. It is an active investigation, and it is a priority. I can report that the IEB currently has adequate resources to conduct this investigation and also to meet its other responsibilities, in particular for the opening of MGM Springfield and the ongoing monitoring of Plainridge. We understand that there is the ability to access additional resources as necessary. We're actively evaluating future needs, but presently we are okay. I'm sure you understand that the IEB does not intend to provide the commission or the public with the details of this investigation until it is completed. This sort of confidentiality in active investigations is, as you know, a common practice. It was the IEB's practice with the initial investigations into the suitability of applicants for gaming licenses, and it's important that the practice be maintained now. The commission is the ultimate arbiter on matters affecting the gaming license. The 5 of you are the decision makers regarding the gaming license. When the IEB concludes the investigation, which I can assure you is a priority, you can expect that the IEB will present the evidence and any recommendations to you. To maintain the integrity of the investigation, it's crucial that the IEB conduct it independently. The commission will need to wait until the investigation is completed and the evidence is presented so that all 5 of you are working from the same set of evidence. An independent investigation will ensure that the commission can maintain its impartiality so that you can carry out your decision-making function at the appropriate time in a fair and unbiased manner. It's understandable that you may be interested in detailed updates of activity or progress, but we all need to keep our eye on the greatest interest here, which is the public interest in the integrity of the process. And I know that we're all committed to conducting the investigation in a way that ensures public confidence in the integrity of the process.
Yeah, I thought your first point was where you say it's best practice. It's really best practice not to update publicly because it really would affect the outcome of the investigation. If you reveal what your investigative strategies and methods are, frankly, they would be much less effective. So I just think that's important to note. And certainly I understand and agree with that, with what you're doing. So we will we certainly trust the team and know that you'll present us with a final product when you're completed with the investigation. So I just wanted to make note that that's why it's best practice. It's really a very important reason for that.
And I just to elaborate on that point, you made a point. Commissioner Cameron is a very experienced law enforcement official, a very experienced investigator. And this began back, I think, at the end of last month. You made a point of talking about there needs to be the time to do this methodically and thoroughly. There was obviously tremendous interest. We have tremendous interest. The public has tremendous interest, and there is a legitimate purpose to do this as quickly as we can. But I think part of our job here is to give you the space and the time to do this work. The stakes are very big. Issues are very big. A lot of people are involved, and we need to make sure that when we finally come to a decision-making processes, that you have had the time and space to do this absolutely right. So we encourage you to do it as quickly as you can, and you will, but we will support you in your need to take the time. Anybody else?
Well, maybe they just agree, but also there's another side of this, which is as part of this process, the applicant, or in this case, the licensee, but we did it with applicants, will have the ability to respond or clarify or whatnot as part of the process, and that's also very important for us to remain in the position that we are. Let the investigative team continue with their process, because the licensee will be afforded the opportunity to respond however they see fit. If we ever get to an adjudicatory hearing or something So I think it's also very important in terms of respecting the rights of the license holders as well.
Anything else?
Okay, so moving on, there is another matter involving a contribution in the amount of $2 million that was made to the Republican Governors Association in October of 2014 by Wynn Resorts Limited. Recently, this office received a letter from the 3 Democratic candidates for Massachusetts governor inquiring about Wynn's contribution to the RGA that was made back in 2014. That letter, which we received earlier this month, suggested that the Wynn donation may have improperly funneled campaign contributions to then gubernatorial candidate Baker and now Governor Baker in violation of Massachusetts law. In light of that letter that we received this month, Chairman Crosby and the executive director asked me to report on, was the IEB aware of the contribution to the IEB, to the RGA at the time in 2014, whether we reviewed it, and what were our conclusions? The short answer is yes, the IEB did look contemporaneously in 2014 at the $2 million contribution to the RGA. We did look at whether it was a prohibited political contribution. We worked in conjunction with our legal division, Catherine and Todd. We discussed this with our gaming consultants, Michael and Carol. We were in contact with the Massachusetts Office of Campaign and Political Finance, and we communicated with General Counsel for the Republican Governors Association. Ultimately, we concluded that based on the evidence that we reviewed, the contribution did not run afoul of Massachusetts law. I'd like to briefly set out a timeline for you to review what we looked at in 2014. On September 17th of 2014, the Commission made the determination to award the Region A gaming license to Wynn Mass LLC. 2 weeks later, on October 1st of 2014, Wynn made the $2 million contribution to the RGA. This contribution was a matter of public record, and I should be clear that on this matter, there were no efforts by Wynn to conceal the contribution. That same day, October 1st, 2014, the RGA made a $1.1 million contribution to the Commonwealth Future Independent Expenditure Political Action Committee. On October 10th, 2014, the RGA made another $1.1 million contribution to the Commonwealth Future PAC. This PAC paid for ads supporting then Republican candidate Baker. The current concern in the letter is that, in essence, the Wynn donation to the RGA funded the Baker campaign. Our review did not find evidence to support this. There are 2 statutes at issue that we reviewed in our analysis, and there's a memo in your packet that follows these 2 provisions. The first is Chapter 23K, Section 46, which is part of the gaming law. That section prohibits applicants for gaming licenses from making certain political contributions. The rationale for that provision, I think, is pretty obvious. It's that no company or person, while the application process for a casino license is pending, should be permitted to influence or potentially influence the award of the license by making any political contribution. And the Commission enforces that provision in the gaming law. As I stated earlier, the contribution to the RGA was not made until after the Commission determined to award the license to Wynn. Thus, Wynn was no longer an applicant on October 1st, 2014. The determination had been made by the Commission, and the Commission had had its final vote. So this restriction on political contributions by gaming applicants was no longer in effect with respect to Wynn. The second provision of law that is applicable here is Chapter 55, Section 7AC. This provision is part of the Commonwealth's campaign finance law. It applies to gaming licensees, and it prohibits gaming licensees from making political contributions in an annual aggregate amount over $200 to any one candidate or a candidate's committee or any other political committee that is subject to Massachusetts law. And that provision in Chapter 55 is enforced by the Office of Campaign and Political Finance. Under this law, Wynn, as a gaming licensee, would have been prohibited from contributing to the Baker campaign or contributing to the Commonwealth Future PAC. The evidence that we reviewed did not show that Wynn's contribution to the RGA did either of these things. The RGA is clearly not a candidate or candidates committee under Section 7A, and also the RGA is not a political committee subject to Massachusetts law under this statutory scheme. We learned that the RGA is a nonprofit organization organized under Section 527 of the Internal Revenue Code, a federal code. 527s, as they are known as, generally work to actively influence elections and policy debates, but do not generally advocate directly for the election or defeat of specific candidates. We learned from our independent research and from our gaming consultants that it is not unusual for gaming companies to make contributions to national party committees, both the RGA and the DGA, for example, and that these organizations are sophisticated multi-state organizations. It is true that the RGA made $2.2 million in donations to the Commonwealth Future PAC within 10 days of the $2 million donation from Wynn to the RGA. So it is understandable that someone might speculate that the money was funneled from Wynn to the RGA to the Commonwealth Future PAC. And I put funneled in quotes. However, the public record of contributions shows that in the 6.5-month period between May 28, 2014 and December 19, 2014, the RGA made 11 separate contributions to the Commonwealth Future PAC, totaling over $10 million. 6 of them came before October 1, and 4 of them came after October 1. Also, General Counsel for the RGA informed us that the Wynn donation was placed in an account at the RGA used for general expenses, that the contribution was not used for political candidates, and that no funds from the Wynn contribution to the RGA were distributed to the Commonwealth Future PAC or to Governor Baker's campaign. We credited these statements. The information from the General Counsel of the RGA was consistent with our own research and with the information provided to us by our consultants. The evidence of the substantial sums that the RGA contributed to the Commonwealth Future PAC in this time frame, which were well in excess of Wynn's donation to the RGA, taken in conjunction with the common practices of the RGA with respect to gaming funds, and the representations of the General Counsel for the RGA, persuaded the IEB that the Wynn donation to the RGA did not amount to a prohibited contribution under Chapter 55. I also note, as I noted in the memo, that the IEB was in contact with the Office of Campaign and Political Finance back in 2014 about this matter, and that the OCPF, which enforces Chapter 55, has not initiated any adverse action against Wynn under Section 7A of its statute. So, to be clear, during the period when Wynn was an applicant, the IEB confirmed that it made no prohibited contributions under the gaming law. And so that goes back to the period when it was an applicant. We look during the application period at what, if any, contributions are made during the applicant period, and that information is part of the Wynn suitability report. So there were no prohibited contributions during the period when Wynn was an applicant. And based on the information that we reviewed back in 2014, I'm satisfied that there was no contravention of Massachusetts law and no lack of compliance based on the information that we reviewed at that time. Of course, understand that monitoring political contributions by our licensees is important, and it's especially important as we enter a new election season. And with that said, as we have said many times before, suitability is ongoing, and if additional details, additional facts, additional evidence come to our attention, we will pursue them aggressively. Essentially, that is my report to complement the memo in your packet about what we did back in 2014.
So the work was done at the time that all of these contributions were made because you wanted to make sure, is that correct?
That's
Wanted to make sure that everything was legal. And this new letter came to light, and what you did now was review the work that was done then, and in doing that review, conducting that review, nothing has changed, correct?
Based on the review of the evidence as it stood then, we continue to be satisfied with the conclusions that we made.
And you just said, which I think is important, if you received credible information that you did not have in the past about an allegation of distributed funds that may or may not have been illegal, you would take a second look.
Absolutely, of course.
Anybody else?
Well, just to follow up from what Commissioner Cameron said, perhaps stating it a slightly different way. Has anything come to the IEB's attention since the initial investigation was done in 2014, which in any way affects the conclusions which the IEB came to in 2014 with regard to this?
Nothing, there has been no additional information that has come to our attention, but should any additional information come to our attention, we would pursue it.
And in the course of your investigation, did you determine whether the RGA has any particular policies with regard to earmarking of contributions from individuals or entities and subsequent contributions to political action committees?
It is our understanding, based on our research, that there is no earmarking to particular candidates.
When you say there is no earmarking, you understand that they have a policy that forbids that?
That's my understanding, correct?
Anybody else?
And one of the things that I just picked up, I guess, as part of this, is that the contribution came from Wynn Resorts, not from Mr. Wynn himself. Is that?
It came from Wynn Resorts, which is a qualifying entity for the Wynn Mass license. And with that designation, Wynn Resorts would still be subject to the two statutes in question.
Am I remembering correctly that when you did the initial work, I think part of your finding was over many, many years they've made many contributions to both Republican and Democratic organizations?
That is my recollection as well.
This is sort of a technicality, but it's clear that that Wynn was not an applicant when the contribution was made. And for our purposes, that's by far the biggest issue. We were in that sort of funny period between the time we decided to make the award and the referendum. And maybe you could argue whether they were a licensee or not, even though they clearly were not an applicant. What's your thinking on that? How did you address that? Kind of.
You're correct in your.
Just for the record, if they weren't a licensee, they could do whatever they wanted. So this is not a potential negative, it's just a peculiarity in the fact.
And you're pointing to the award, the decision, the agreement to award the license, which was made in that time frame where there was a ballot question looming within, I think, 60 to 90 days from the agreement to award the license. So your award was done in the form of an agreement to award, and as I recall, it was because otherwise Wynn would be required to submit a non-refundable $85 million fee, potentially 90 days later to have gaming not allowable in the Commonwealth. So for purposes of the analysis under section 46 of the gaming law, I did look at it as a binary. Your section 46 talks about being an applicant. It doesn't talk about being an applicant or a licensee. It talks about no applicant shall do this. So it was, under the analysis for 46, a binary concept. And when
Binary meaning applicant or not.
applicant or not. So given what the award of the license said and given the final vote of the commission, it was we viewed it as Wynn was no longer an applicant, certainly for purposes of 46.
Yeah, my recollection is that they were licensees, they were just a conditional licensee on that fee, on the consideration of the fee, because,
Our regulations provide that your decision is made when the vote is taken, so once you voted to award them a license, they became a license.
Well, they were, so they, even by our own regs, they were like this.
Your decision is, it's when you take the vote, the decision becomes effective.
Interesting. Okay, good. Anybody else, questions on this issue, anything else for Councilor Lilios?
thanks for your memories, very well articulated.
Well, it's always refreshing to have something come up and say, look back, see how we handled that. Look back and see how we handled it. Like, good job.
I think it would also be helpful, obviously, if there's an ongoing restriction on donations of employees over licensees going forward. We don't track that at CPF, but it may make sense to, we approach another election cycle, that, a reminder to send to our licensees as to that piece of the statute, not the applicant piece, but that they're a licensee.
That's correct, and we are implementing a protocol now to do those routine checks, even though it's a statute that we do not enforce, and there's communications with OCPF about this arrangement. But we, like we did in the first round for initial suitability, we made those inquiries of OCPF. It's pretty easy to do when it's public information, so we have incorporated that as part of our ongoing review of suitability.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, we are gonna take a break before we get on with the rest of the meeting. We will reconvene in minutes.
Thank you, well done.
Thank you.
Would you like to act on it?
Did you? So I might not have.
Mike, are we ready to go? We are reconvening public meeting number 236 at about 1:35:40, and we are on to item number 4. Mr. Conley, Director of our Licensing and Associates.
So yet again, I think I've cleared a room with my talk. Good afternoon, Mr.
Oh, you've got others that clear them faster than you do. We got a bunch of them.
This is exciting
Wait till
stuff.
we get to the rings.
Exactly.
This is exciting stuff.
So I'm here today with Pat Mandamba and Mary Kay Rourke from MGM to present on this topic because we wanted to reflect that this really was a collaborative effort between us and MGM to work through this exemption issue. And I wanted to upfront thank them for all their help in this process. So we're here today to present recommendations to the Commission to exempt certain gaming service employee positions from the registration requirement. And I wanted to speak a little bit about the process as to how we got here. So at the outset, when the law was changed and passed to allow the Commission to exempt certain employees, we went through, frankly, all of the SER positions and went through them, internally and also with MGM to gain a deeper understanding as to the specific job functions of each of these positions, as well as where they sat in the hierarchy overall, so that we'd have a better understanding when we might eventually approach making those recommendations. At the January 18th meeting, Director Wells was here and spoke to you about the process in general, as well as putting forward some criteria for consideration. So criteria that we might use when we evaluate positions to make recommendations. At that time, the commission provided feedback and further guidance on those conditions, and we used those to produce a form that we distributed to MGM to provide us additional information on each of these positions. It was actually called the Identification of Potential Positions for Exemption from the Registration Requirement by the MGC. We call it the PPE form, man. I mean, that's right out of federal bureaucracy there. That's why the room is clear, exactly as Pat notes. So this form was important, though, because what it did was it provided us a consistent manner to gather information about each position that we might consider providing a recommendation on. It provides the commission a consistent set of facts to when you are looking at and evaluating the recommendations from licensing and IEP. And finally, it will provide the record. So as we go forward, this is not obviously the last time I may or someone else may be in front of you with potential exemption recommendations, and it will give us a good record to look at to see how we made evaluations in the past. And it contained, importantly, those 8 factors that were discussed at the January 18th meeting, which included whether or not a position involved work on the gaming floor, whether there were managerial responsibilities in any department, supervisory responsibilities in human resources, sales, and marketing, access to secure casino back-of-the-house areas, including executive offices without security escort, responsibilities for accounting or finance relating to the gaming establishment, right access, meaning the ability to change data in a gaming-related casino database, and finally, responsibilities that potentially impact the integrity of gaming operations, including access to confidential or sensitive information. So for each position, and it's all in the packet, MGM provided feedback on all those factors for each position under consideration. So once we received that set of PPE forms, we did a further analysis, and again, worked very closely with MGM to make final recommendations, which encompass 127 jobs, with an asterisk there, and we'll get to that in a second, encompassing 870 employees. And just to note, that is nearly 60%, there's my Boston accent, 60% of the eligible SER positions that could have been put forward for exemption. This is not, as I mentioned a moment ago, the end of the process. This is really the middle. I fully expect, again, to be in front of you with further recommendations to include some of the entertainment block employees, which I believe, and MGM can answer better than I, but I believe will largely be vendor employees. So some of the facilities that are part of the entertainment block be run by vendors. Those employees by our reg would be considered gaming service employees. We fully expect that we'll go through the analysis of potentially exempting them. And also, there may be additional positions, as you've done your analysis, that you ask us to consider that we haven't already considered. One position, actually 2 positions, but 2 different flavors that I want to point out is the position of porter. So utility and casino porters, essentially those folks that clean. The casino porters in particular are focused on cleaning the gaming area, so around machines, table games. And the utility porters do, my understanding, more general cleaning, but specifically if there's a bigger job, more complex job in the gaming area, would come in and do that.
Is there a separate different category for people who clean elsewhere in the gaming establishment, like at the movie theater or at the hotel or whatever?
There's several categories of porters, but the one that I think falls into the utility porter, which is 16472, we're gonna withdraw the request for exemption for that. There was an inadvertent mistake in the information that was given to the commission. We literally, within a few minutes before the meeting, we realized there was a mistake. And it's just gonna be part of our continuing discussion. 16472, which is utility.
Okay, so utility orders who are people that are called in apparently from deep cleaning facility.
They are essentially, since it was actually my first position in the casino industry, 1981 in Hatters, Atlantic City.
Is that right?
It's carpet cleaner. Really? When I was end of my freshman year in college.
You was a first year trooper. I didn't run into you though.
That was probably a
Well,
good
that's probably
sign.
probably a good thing though, right?
Oh, yeah, today.
In any event, it's essentially the next step up from a quarter, from an entry level quarter that can clean carpet. But they do have entry, and we're continuing to have discussions about the quarters in general. So that particular quarter is, while it's not interchangeable, but it has some of the same duties as the casino position that's not on. So that's about 46 positions. The other positions is about 100 or so. I mean, about 150 altogether that are up in the air. We want to continue that discussion. That was
But
an erroneous.
quarters that function in the hotel, for example, they're on here already?
They are already on here, as well as the ones in the restaurants.
Right, okay, so the only quarters which we think of as needed, are, that have not yet been addressed are the utility quarters and the regular quarters, and will be on the casino floor, maybe on the casino.
They may be under, during the ordinary course of their duties.
And that's about 100 of the 625. And
No,
not yet been exempt.
Of the 625, yeah, it's a little over 100. It's 100 and change. Again, because as Pat pointed out, the utility porters are in there. MGM asked us to, remove the exemption. Licensing agrees. And what we're doing is we're in the process of getting additional information on both of those positions, and we may come back with further recommendation. But also note, the compendium is really a living document. It's changes on the margins right now, but there may be new positions that are created, and we may bring those forward. But there's obviously some opportunity to revisit this list, including, and it's important to note that should you vote to exempt a position, anytime the job description changes for an exempted position, or any position for that matter, the licensee must notify us of that change. If it were a job change or change to a job description for an exempted employee, we would review that specifically to see whether the change has any impact on our recommendation to the commission for exemption, and if so, we'd bring it back perhaps for reconsideration to actually be classified again as a service employee. So this is not, a terminal process in the sense that it can't be revisited. Any of these decisions obviously can be picked up and revisited based on the circumstances.
Well, just listening, it sounds like it was a collaborative process. Worked well together to come up with this, and I think what's good about this, from my standpoint, is we have the comfort level, but we also have some things where we have we have some time to assess our risk, and I think that's really important to a brand new agency, just so we have that level of comfort. Know what happens in other jurisdictions, but I think it's really important that our team have that ability, and so that they can see firsthand where the risk is and where it is not. So I appreciate the collaboration.
I also appreciate the collaborative work. This seems to have been done in a very expedient amount of time. I think when the legislation passed, all this work to compile all the information, take a look, some serious level of detail at each position, how it met our guidelines or didn't meet our guidelines. So I think you, Paul, and your team, as well as the team from MGM. I do think, I'm encouraged by the numbers. I'm somewhat surprised and excited by the numbers of positions that are now going to be available for folks who, prior to the change, might have found themselves on the outside looking in at a career-changing opportunity or life-changing opportunity. So I think that the headcount that we've come to agreement on is encouraging. It's certainly going to get a lot of folks out there, hopefully, with action today to start, going on to SkillSmart and putting their information in now, knowing that they're eligible. A couple of caveats to that is we obviously know that MGM, our licensee, also has your own background process that each employee is going to be required to go through for many of these positions. We think about the public education effort about what this change means and how it's going to impact people out there looking for a career at MGM. We need to be mindful of that public education efforts, what the change means, but what it still entails. I had two quick questions to our licensees. Your workforce development plan was great at pulling out a couple of different positions that show kind of a career pathway. A lot of what's contained in here